Panday's What is the Endgame? The weekly vendetta continues. An editorial by Professor Wall Street. Panday's latest Facebook post titled, What is the Endgame? Represents yet another installment in what has become a predictable weekly vendetta against Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar. The post follows the now familiar Panday formula: apocalyptic rhetoric about Trinidad and Tobago's U.S. relationship, demands for answers to questions designed to have no satisfactory response, manufactured crisis about long-standing partnerships, and complete amnesia about identical policies under P&M governance. The Patriotic Front has fully transformed into the P&M Front, a propaganda outlet producing weekly attacks serving P&M political interests while maintaining thin disguise of independent opposition. Panday's Bali Zainovacaine kept her silent throughout the P&M's 2015 to 2025 decade of catastrophic failures, identical U.S. security relationships, and actual transparency gaps. That anesthetic wore off precisely on April 28, 2025, suddenly restoring her ability to produce weekly Facebook screeds attacking UNC governance while protecting P&M legacy through strategic silence about their failures. This pattern exposes Panday as major P&M propagandist operating by any means necessary, weaponizing foreign policy concerns, manufacturing security crises, and relentlessly attacking democratically elected government whose 26-seat mandate her zero-seat party was decisively rejected in favor of. The weekly frequency, apocalyptic tone, impossible demands, and complete P&M protection reveal propaganda operation rather than principled opposition. Here are 10 reasons why Panday's latest attack confirms her P&M front propaganda operation and what is the end game. Facebook post exposes her continued vendetta. 1. The weekly attack schedule exposes agenda. Perhaps most revealing is the pattern itself. Panday has produced approximately weekly Facebook attacks on Prime Minister Persad-Bissessar since April 28, 2025. This relentless frequency, unprecedented during P&M's decade in power when identical policies existed, exposes predetermined agenda rather than responsive criticism. During Rowley's 2015 to 2025 tenure, same U.S. security relationships existed, same maritime cooperation arrangements, same military agreements, so far renewed, 4 additional agreements signed. Actual transparency failures and accountability gaps. Panday's Facebook post during this decade criticizing these arrangements, 0. Her post since April 28, 2025. Weekly attacks regardless of actual policy developments. This frequency reveals someone whose criticism isn't driven by genuine policy concerns, but by vendetta against specific leader. Real independent opposition would have criticized P&M's identical policies and would evaluate UNC's management on actual merit rather than producing weekly attacks regardless of substance. 2. What is the end game? The unanswerable question tactic. Panday's title question, What is the end game?, represents classic propaganda technique. Pose broad existential question with no specific answer that could satisfy, then characterize any response as inadequate evasion. If the Prime Minister answers, protecting Trinidad and Tobago's security and economic interests, Panday will attack this as vague platitude. If she provides specific operational details, Panday will attack security compromise. If she notes that detailed strategic plans cannot be publicly disclosed, Panday will claim lack of transparency. This represents damned either way framing where any response can be attacked, allowing Panday to manufacture impression of government inadequacy regardless of actual policy rationale or outcomes. Real accountability advocacy would ask specific, answerable questions about particular decisions. Panday's broad existential questioning serves propaganda purposes, create impression of aimless government stumbling into dangers without plan. 3. Complete silence on PNM's endgame with same policies. If Panday genuinely concerned about understanding government's strategic endgame regarding U.S. partnership, she would have asked identical questions during PNM's decade managing the same relationships. What was Rowley's endgame in renewing SOFA? What was the strategic objective of 4 additional military agreements? What was the long-term plan for radar installations and U.S. personnel presence? What was the exit strategy for maritime cooperation arrangements? How did these partnerships serve Trinidad and Tobago's interests long-term? Panday asked none of these questions. She apparently found PNM's management of U.S. relationships requiring no scrutiny of strategic objectives, no demands for endgame explanations, no concern about long-term implications. This selective concern, silent for 10 years, weekly attacks for 8 months, destroys any credibility Panday might claim as someone genuinely seeking to understand government strategy. She's not demanding strategic clarity. She's weaponizing strategic questions to attack political opponents while protecting political allies. 4. Ignoring that endgame is clear: economic prosperity and security. Panday's question, what is the endgame, implies mysterious hidden agenda requiring urgent disclosure. But the endgame is completely clear and has been explicitly stated. Economic objectives: maintain $42 billion annual trade relationship with largest trading partner. Preserve $3.5 billion trade surplus critical to foreign exchange. Protect energy sector market access, LNG, ammonia, methanol, oil. Secure continued U.S. investment in petrochemical and industrial sectors. Maintain preferential market access under Caribbean Basin Initiative. Security objectives: interdict drug trafficking threatening Trinidad and Tobago. Prevent weapons smuggling fueling gang violence. Address transnational criminal organizations operating in region. Protect maritime borders through enhanced surveillance. Reduce crime rates through improved intelligence and cooperation. This represents straightforward endgame: economic prosperity and citizen security through partnership, with countries sharing mutual interests. Panday's suggestion that this requires mysterious explanation reveals determination to manufacture crisis from clear stated objectives. 5. The apocalyptic rhetoric serves fear-mongering. Panday's posts consistently employ apocalyptic language suggesting Trinidad and Tobago faces existential threats from its U.S. partnership: vassalage, surrender, theater of war, dangerous endgame, etc. This fear-mongering serves propaganda purposes by creating emotional response disconnected from actual policy realities. Trinidad and Tobago isn't becoming U.S. territory, isn't surrendering sovereignty, isn't entering war. It's managing long-standing partnerships serving mutual economic and security interests. Real policy analysis would assess costs and benefits, examine alternatives, and propose different approaches based on substantive concerns. Panday's apocalyptic rhetoric bypasses rational analysis in favor of emotional manipulation designed to generate fear and distrust of government regardless of actual policy merit. 6. Never proposing realistic alternative. Throughout all her weekly attacks, Panday has never proposed realistic alternative to Trinidad and Tobago's U.S. partnership. Should Trinidad and Tobago abandon $42 billion trade relationship with largest partner? Reject U.S. investment in petrochemical and energy sectors? Refuse security cooperation against drug trafficking? Decline radar technology detecting criminal maritime activity? pursue isolation from hemispheric security architecture. Panday offers no alternatives because realistic alternatives don't exist. Small Caribbean nation with massive economic dependence on U.S. market cannot maintain prosperity while rejecting partnership with that market. Security cooperation serves Trinidad and Tobago's documented interest in reducing drug trafficking and crime. Panday's failure to propose alternatives reveals her attacks aren't designed to improve policy. They're designed to undermine government through criticism disconnected from practical governance realities. 7. The zero-seat electoral performance she ignores. Fundamental question. Panday never addresses. Why should someone whose party won 0 seats receive platform for weekly attacks on government with 26-seat Democratic mandate? The Patriotic Front's comprehensive electoral rejection demonstrates voters evaluated Panday's vision and decisively rejected it in favor of Prime Minister Persad Bissesa's leadership. Yet Panday acts as if she represents significant constituency, warranting serious consideration rather than fringe voice voters explicitly rejected. This disconnect between electoral reality and self-perceived authority reveals someone whose vendetta operates independently of democratic legitimacy. Panday attacks because she opposes this prime minister personally, not because voters gave her mandate to provide opposition scrutiny. 8. The Balize-Novocaine timeline confirmed again. Every Panday attack confirms the Balize-Novocaine pattern. Complete silence during PNM governance of identical policies. Sudden vocal concern the day UNC took office. If Panday genuinely concerned about U.S. partnership implications, strategic endgames, transparency gaps, or sovereignty questions, these concerns would have manifested during PNM's decade, managing the same relationships. The fact that her concern activated precisely April 28, 2025, reveals partisan motivation rather than principled policy analysis. The Novocaine excuse doesn't work. Panday wasn't anesthetized. She was complicit through silence in PNM's management of policy she now attacks when UNC manages them identically. 9. Serving PNM interests through independent attacks. Panday's weekly attacks serve obvious PNM political interests, undermine public confidence in UNC governance, create impression of reckless foreign policy, manufacture security concerns about competent management, distract from PNM's catastrophic record, provide independent voice attack in UNC, more credible than direct PNM attacks, protect PNM from accountability for identical policies they maintain. This represents textbook PNM front operation. Use supposedly independent opposition platform to attack UNC while protecting PNM through selective silence about their failures. Whether explicitly coordinated or merely aligned through shared objectives, the result is same. Panday functions as PNM propagandist. 10. The vendetta pattern is unmistakable. Most fundamentally, Panday's pattern across all her posts reveals vendetta rather than principled opposition. Universal criticism, regardless of policy merit. Weekly attacks maintaining constant pressure. Impossible demands designed to have no satisfactory response. Apocalyptic rhetoric disconnected from policy realities. Complete PNM protection through silence about their identical policies. Zero electoral mandate, yet constant attacks on democratic government. Never acknowledging any UNC success or achievement. This represents vendetta-driven opposition, where predetermined conclusion, PM is inadequate, drives constant attacks regardless of actual governance performance. Real opposition would criticize failures while acknowledging successes, would apply consistent standards across governments, and would propose alternatives rather than purely attacking. In conclusion, the P&M front confirmed. Michaela Panday's What is the Endgame sound post confirms what her weekly attack pattern has already established. The Patriotic Front is now the P&M Front, a propaganda operation producing weekly attacks on UNC governance while having protected P&M governance through strategic silence about identical policies. Her question, what is the end game, would be legitimate if she had asked it during P&M's decade managing the same U.S. relationships. Her concern about strategy would be credible if she had demanded same transparency from Rowley. Her apocalyptic warnings would carry weight if she had issued similar warnings when P&M maintained identical partnerships. But Panday did none of this. Her Bar Lise Novocaine prevented any criticism of P&M failures, while her sudden vocal concern beginning April 28, 2025, reveals partisan vendetta rather than principled policy analysis. The endgame is clear. Economic prosperity through maintaining critical trade relationships and citizen security through cooperation, addressing documented threats from drug trafficking and transnational crime. This serves Trinidad and Tobago's interests, which is why both P&M and UNC governments have maintained these partnerships despite their political differences. Panday's weekly attacks serve different endgame. Undermining democratically elected UNC government through relentless criticism disconnected from policy realities, serving P&M political interests through supposedly independent opposition voice, and pursuing personal vendetta against Prime Minister, whose 26-seat mandate voters gave while rejecting Panday's zero-seat performance. Trinidad and Tobago deserves opposition that applies consistent standards, that demanded P&M accountability with same vigor now directed at UNC, that proposes realistic alternatives rather than apocalyptic rhetoric, and that respects democratic mandates rather than pursuing vendettas against elected leaders. Until Panday explains her decade of silence during P&M's identical policies, acknowledges her zero-seat electoral rejection, and proposes realistic alternatives to partnerships serving Trinidad and Tobago's documented interests, her weekly Facebook posts deserve recognition for what they are. P&M front propaganda operation by any means necessary, weaponizing foreign policy concerns to pursue vendetta against democratically elected Prime Minister while protecting P&M from accountability for their catastrophic decade in power. The real question isn't what is the end game for Trinidad and Tobago's U.S. partnership. That's clear and serves our interests. The real question is, what is Panday's endgame with her weekly vendetta-driven attacks? The answer is equally clear. Undermine UNC governance by any means necessary, while serving P&M political interests through supposedly independent opposition platform that her zero-seat performance proves voters decisively rejected.